Welcome, everybody. This is the UUR, a Severance podcast with Rodnesha Green and Callie Thomas. Welcome to our show. This is our first episode. We are excited and scared, but we are ready to do this. So a little bit about the show, Callie? Yeah?
Yeah. About the show, about the podcast.
About the podcast. There you go.
Yeah. Well, we are very big fans of the show Severance, and we thought as we are waiting with bated breath for season 2 to come out, it would be fun to rewatch season 1 and go through and recap and share our thoughts and see if we've noticed anything that we missed the first watch through.
Which we definitely have done.
I know I have so far. And talk about that with all of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% that is the case. And I don't know about you, but there are a ton of things I somehow missed.
So many things.
Right?
And also, I felt like when we were watching it, we were the only two people we knew who were watching it. So I feel like we went through these episodes a lot while they were airing, and somehow I still missed a lot of things.
So my first time through watching it, I don't know if you remember very well how you felt, but I was so gripped in so many ways that I don't know if I can explain. Maybe now I can explain it, but back then I was just like, I don't know what it is about the show, but I'm so into it.
It's just so different.
Yeah.
It's just so different, even than any other sci-fi things that I was watching or have been watching. And as someone who consumes a lot of streaming service content, I was just like, oh yes, this is so different than everything else I'm watching right now. And I was super excited about it.
Same. Okay, question. Would you classify this show as sci-fi?
I mean, is there sci-fi light? Because there's a sci-fi element to it too. Mm-hmm. And side note, we'll get into this in a future episode, but we do have our hands on a pilot script that is different from this pilot. And that one seems to have far more sci-fi elements. So it seems like they toned it down. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about that more
when we get to that one
episode. But I don't know, because it seems to be futuristic, like this procedure of severance seems futuristic. Yeah. So that qualifies as sci-fi, right? Or no, I don't know. But also, there is a question about when this takes place. I don't believe it's agreed upon. So it might not be futuristic.
It is one of those shows, that is very loose on the timeline. Mm-hmm. It does not directly imply that it is current. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of homages to past technology, which we'll get into that. And this is technology that we don't have presently, so it does insinuate that it may be in a future of some kind. Or it could be an alternate universe. Who knows?
Which all qualifies it as sci-fi, right?
I think so. And again, I'm not a sci-fi expert. Okay. People can respond. You can, hit us up directly and tell us, you don't know anything. This definitely is or is not, and here's why.
I mean, it's like magic and mythical and science and space and whatnot. Sometimes it's just computer stuff we haven't thought of yet in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's the scariest stuff of all, right? I mean, right? As we riff and ramble, guys, the point of this podcast really is, again, our love of this show. We're super excited to talk about it. We want to share that with the world and any other fans of the show. And for anyone who maybe is just coming to the show and is kind of, going through it and just what is going on and what is this and is anybody noticing, this is for you guys as well. And I will say, as we go through the podcast, and since this is a rewatch, we will try our very best not to get ahead of ourselves and get into spoiler territory. Mm-hmm. We're going to try very, very hard to just stick with what is presently happening in the episode we're watching and just go by that. Which is going to be a real struggle for me. I don't know about for you, but I'm just like, ooh, knowing what's coming. It's like, okay, but just go back to that novice mind when you were just watching it one episode at a time and you had no idea what was going on and everything just seemed brand new. So I'm going to try to tap back into that side of myself. So all that to say, we are on episode 1 of the Severance series entitled Welcome to Hell.
Good news about hell.
Ah! No, I said it wrong. Good news about hell. And I looked right at it too. Come on. I guess in my brain, I'm like, no, this is welcome to hell. Like, this is your
I
introduction.
mean, it is an orientation episode for sure.
For sure. Shall I give our abbreviated summary of the show?
Yes, go for it.
Sure, sure, sure. All right, guys. So, in this episode, we are introduced very abruptly to the world of Lumon. This is the company that everybody is working for on the show. We find a woman who is going to be later identified as Helly R. lying on the table, and she is unconscious. A voice pops in off screen that welcomes her to this eerie world, one where she seemingly knows nothing. And we find out throughout the episode that this is Helly's first day as a Lumon employee and severed. Now, we find out that severance is an elective procedure that allows employees to separate their work life from their personal life. This is not forced upon anybody, so this is something that Helly has chosen in her outside life. But she doesn't seem to be acclimating very well to her new surroundings, and it is the job of Mark S., her department chief, to get her initiated and on board. Now, this is where we also follow the character of Mark, whose full name is Mark Scout. And I think at this point, this is the only person who we have a first and last name for. Because in the Severance world, everybody just goes by a first name and a last initial.
Yeah.
So we follow the character of Mark Scout, not just in his life at Lumon on the severed floor, but also in his outside real world life. At work, Mark is very happy-go-lucky, and he's being overseen by his emotionally detached boss, Miss Cobell, and another overseer type manager named Mr. Milchick. He has some other coworkers as well that he seems to have a kinship with. Their names are Irving and Dylan. But off campus, we learn that Mark has been through something very traumatic in his life, and it seems like that has guided him toward choosing the severance procedure. So in his outside life, we find that he personally lives alone. Mark seems pretty content with being severed. Not exactly happy as a person, but content with his choice to be severed. And it doesn't look like folks around him are sharing in that joy. So it isn't until he is visited by a man named Petey that he realizes this is a former Lumon employee, and not just that, but someone that Mark worked with and had a close BFF type relationship with. So through that conversation, Petey clues Mark into the fact that Lumon is not the place that it makes itself out to be, dare I say, a dangerous place to work at, and Petey has found a way to get himself out. And he effectively gives Mark a very red pill, blue pill decision. He doesn't force anything on him, but he tells him basically that if he wants to know the truth about what's really going on, here's where you can find me. And that's the episode, guys. Or at least that's the summary. Why don't we go ahead and get some cast introductions out the way, since this is the very first episode. Now, going forward, we won't keep listing the main cast. We know the folks that are going to be with us throughout the run of the show. So whenever we get to cast and guest stars, we'll probably just make mention of the people who are new to the episode, or maybe people who are coming back that haven't been in a few episodes, but we won't go through the main cast over and over. But let's just kick it off with who our stars are.
Yeah. So Mark S. is played by Adam Scott. Dylan is Zach Cherry. Irving, or Irv, is John Torturo. Helly is played by Britt Lauer. Lauer. Probably Lauer.
I won't say how I know, but, well, yeah. I may have met her. Anyway, we'll get to it.
I'm so jealous. That's a sidebar. Mr. Milchick is played by Tremel Tillman. Miss Cobell, Patricia Arquette. Rickon, who I have words about in this episode.
Oh, we will discuss Rickon.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to say his last name right. Michael Chernus or Chernus?
Chernus.
Okay. Devin by it's played by Jen Tillich, and Petey Yule Vasquez.
And then we do have some guest stars this episode. Most of these are going to be dinner guests that we see at the quote dinner that they have at Rickon and Devin's house. Patton, who is the dinner guest, is played by Donald Weber Jr. Rebecca is played by Grace Rex. Denise, with an A, is played by Annie McNamara. Florence is played by, I believe it's Antula Katsumati. Oh boy. Oh, I should have practiced this before. Katsumatides or Katsumatides.
Huh.
It seems like a Greek last name. I could be totally wrong.
It does seem very
I'm
Greek.
probably saying it very wrong. It's all Greek to me. Sorry, bad joke. Um, and then Judd, who when I saw on IMDb, I was like, who the heck is Judd? Judd is the security guard that we see.
Oh, Judd, good old Judd.
Good old Judd. So Judd is played by Mark Kenneth Smaltz, and we will be seeing him from episode to episode. So the writers of this episode are Dan Erickson, who is the showrunner. He's the creator of the series, and Anna Oyang Monik or oh boy,
Monk?
Monk,
Monk?
Monch. I am so sorry. Who's that?
Damn, we should have looked this up.
Sure should have. Okay, next time we'll be better about this, guys. But those are the writers of the episode, and it is directed by the one and only Ben Stiller. Okay, before we get into the scene by scene, can we just discuss Ben Stiller,
Right.
director
Right.
of this series? Now, I know that Ben Stiller has been directing, and people who follow Ben Stiller's career, I'm sure, could tell me all about the things he's been doing, but I have not seen this come from him in any previous work. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me. If he's done like some short film or some indie project that I don't know about, please share. But this came out of nowhere for me.
Same. And that's one of the reasons I was immediately hooked too when I saw his name attached to this project and was like, not anything I would have guessed Ben Stiller would have been directing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And I think the first time I heard Ben Stiller being attached to this project, I just assumed he was acting in it.
Right. Same.
And then I later found out that he was directing it, and I was like, oh, okay. All right, interesting.
I kept waiting for him to make an appearance too.
Who knows? Who knows what Ben Stiller will do? He's Ben Stiller. But yeah, then I thought, is this a comedy? Because again, going back to the promotional material when the show was first coming out, there wasn't a lot that was really said about it. I mean, it came out during the height of COVID quarantine. You know, obviously TV and film stuff was real weird and wonky, still kind of is. And so there wasn't a lot of promotional material that really told you what was going on. It was very kind of vague. Yeah. And so you couldn't get from the gist of things like, is there going to be a dark comedy element to it? Like Ben Stiller is very much known for his comedy. And so directing it, you think that's going to be the default. And so I was so pleasantly surprised to see that this is not at all in that at all. And it is so well done. So well done.
Yes. There's some good comic relief, but it doesn't lean on it. It doesn't come in spaces that need filler, if that makes sense.
Agree.
You know?
Yeah. I was very pleased to see what came out of this. And I hope, you know, he's getting all the flowers and accolades for the show. And shout out to Dan Erickson too, because like this is such a wild concept. And just to kind of this isn't getting ahead with the series, but I did get a chance to go to an in-person, what am I trying to say?
Screening,
thank you.
Of the finale.
And we got to hear some of the cast and Ben Stiller and Dan Erickson talking. Dan Erickson talked about how he wrote this script while he was still working as a corporate person, and that was a lot of what inspired this world and story. And I'm just like, whoa, first off, what was your job? It must have been terrible.
Right.
And second of all, what was the root? Where did this start? Was it just like a workplace series and then it devolved into like, what's the worst work could be if it had a dark side? Because
right. Or how bad would your job have to be for you to want to turn off your ability to remember what you do there when you go home every night? Yeah, what was his job before?
I don't remember if he said, but I do remember it was in a corporate setting, and clearly it was not the bee's knees.
Sidebar. I will never forgive myself for not canceling work that day to go with Rodnesha to the finale, because I had the opportunity to go to the screening with her, and I made a responsible choice and still worked, and I regret that wholeheartedly.
And I'm sure when we get to the finale and we talk more about that, because I will share more that I can. But all that to say, yes, Callie was the first person that I reached out to, because I was like, it has to be Callie. We're the only two people talking about it. And then she happened to have an event that she had taken time off for the previous week, and was like, I should be a responsible adult and not take off 2 weekends in a row and blah, blah, blah. I respect that. Okay, who else wants this ticket? So, unfortunately, it did go elsewhere. The person who did get to go was very grateful that Callie wasn't able to go.
Oh man.
But yes, we both lament that she was unable to be there. It was a grand night. And we'll discuss that when we get to the finale. All right. Well, let's get into a scene by scene breakdown. Now, I say scene by scene, but truly, we don't have a script in front of us. And the script we do have is not what this is.
Okay, I was gonna say because I was not writing down my notes broken down. I mean, it's in order as I watched it, but I surely was not like, okay, here's the start of another scene.
Well, I tried to go either by scene or at least by segment if things like were in a natural kind of enclosed box. So are they like all the actual scene numbers if you were to look at a script? Probably not. I'm sure there's like 50 scenes. But I tried to break it down just kind of based on transitions and points in the story where it's kind of breaking away from one thing to the other. So if I call it a scene, that's just my way of saying like this sequence or this time frame or whatever. So that's just how we're going to do it. So first scene sequence in this episode is basically kind of what we talked about in the summary. We see a woman who's lying on a conference table. Literally, that is the introductory scene. Woman passed out on a conference table, fully dressed.
It's such a beautiful, striking first shot. So it's an overhead of her laying on this conference table, empty conference chairs around. The carpet on the flooring is this ugly 2-shade 70s green, which is the first like nod to like, okay, when does this take place? It must not be current because it looks very retro. And she looks like, you know, the police chalk outline of the dead body staring, you know?
Yeah, like legs are like contorted and the arms. I mean, she doesn't look like she's broken, but she definitely doesn't look like she's in just a normal sleeping position.
Yeah, she's not sleeping comfortably.
But the visual imagery, if we do want to touch on that real quick, because I did make some notes on that. By the by, guys, if you're watching this series, if you're just getting into it, or if you have watched it, I recommend going back and rewatching and just looking at the visual storytelling that's happening. It is so specific and it is so intentional. It's beautiful. The layers and levels and the color choices and color palettes. I'm going to try to bring as much of this up as I can because I just find it very interesting. But there might be things that you guys notice as well. And if you do, please share. But in this opening shot, I remember it had to be something the creators talked about. The way it's visually set up is very womb-like. And so it's meant to kind of look like a fetus in the womb. And you notice that the speaker box just above her head is like a detached umbilical cord is what they referenced it. So it's like a disconnect from that womb, right? So it's like this new entity is being born that has a blank slate, has no memories, no nothing, just new to the world. And that was kind of what they were trying to establish in that opening shot. And I was like, wild. That is wild. You've got to be kidding me. That is crazy. Who thinks of that? Smart people. That's who.
That's who.
Smart people. So just wanted to point that out. So if you were kind of like, why is this the scene they chose? There is an intention. There's a purpose to that. I just found myself kind of looking at everything and just being like, I wonder what this means. I mean, I counted the number of chairs around the table. There are 12. I was looking at the layers. There are 3 layers before you get to the table. And I was trying to think of like the colors and what did those mean? And I'm still trying to piece that together.
I have a theory about the green, all the green, but we'll get there.
Oh, okay. The other thing that I just had to wonder is like, okay, she went through the severance procedure, right? And then I guess you knock out after that procedure's over. So someone had to wheel her down to the severance floor and throw her on that table. Who's doing that? The way she's
laying, it appears that she fell from the ceiling, like she got dropped into there. Because, like, why would another human put her on the table like that? Why not put it there?
And then that's my thing. And I wonder, like, do they lower her down onto the table? Like, is this a Milchick job? Like, is Milchick having to place these bodies on the table?
Very true. This is one of the many things that make me feel like the goal of the orientation process is to have them be as disoriented as possible, which the irony of that is there is a line where Mark says to her,
Ooh.
"You seem disoriented. Good thing this is an orientation." I think the goal is for them to be very, very confused. So why sit them in a chair? Make them wake up and think that they just survived a fight.
This is true. Now, so here's my next question. Are they doing this with every person that comes in? Is it just this particular person? Did you lower Dylan onto that table or hoist him onto that table? Are we doing this with everybody? Does everyone get a different position? Like some people end up on a chair, some people end up on the floor. I'm just wondering. For visual storytelling, it's lovely and it's beautiful. But then in my head of just practicalities, I'm like, are they doing this with every person? Does every severed person end up on this table?
Well, that brings me to another question. So going on in this scene, right? We get the start of her orientation is she's being asked these questions by the voice in the speaker box. Mm-hmm. It's not revealed yet that Mark is the voice, but it's Mark. And you hear him say like, "Oh, my bad, I've forgotten the preamble," because he just starts asking, "Who are you?" And then we get to see Mark on the other side, not at the same time, but later in the episode, we see Mark on the other side asking the questions. And before he starts, he's verifying with Mr. Milchek if this is where he starts. So did he get set up to start incorrectly? Is the manual set up? Because he flips forward in the manual to get to the preamble that he missed. That doesn't make any sense. Like, is the goal on his end to be just as confused about the process, or is he just confused because it's his first time doing it? I don't know, but I don't understand why he confirmed. He even said it seems like this is strange to jump right into these questions. Mr. Milchek is like, no, it's standard.
Interesting. Now that makes me wonder if it is set up intentionally that way to be disorienting to them to further disorient the new hire. Because my thought would be too, like, okay, he's been through this. Doesn't he remember what he, when PD did it with him? I mean, I get that you're like kind of in outer space when it's happening, but I would think that you would remember to some degree how it went. Like, okay, they started rambling about this and then they started asking me questions. So that does make me wonder if it is intentional.
Yeah. And what he does remember is that he was very upset and he wanted to kill the person on the other end of the speaker because he was so disoriented.
I don't remember if it was this episode or the next one, but I did have this question of like, man, I wish there was a way we could see the other orientations. Because I also made a timeline too, because this wasn't something I was really keeping track of the first go round of like when everybody arrived and who's been there for how long. And so Dylan, I believe in this episode, says he's been there for like a year. Irving, I think in this episode, says that it's been 3 years, but then he starts talking about things that seem like it should have been further back than 3 years ago. PD, when he has the conversation, says that it's been 2 years. Or no, wait, Mark's been 2 years.
Mark has been there for 2 years. Well, and there's a point, and sorry, this isn't in this episode, but there is a point where Dylan is having a conversation with Irving. Or no, it is in this episode, actually. They're talking about...
It is.
Yeah, they're talking about, like, Mark being the one to be promoted to department chief. And he's like, well, you've only been here slightly more than me. Dylan says this, Irving. So I am confused about their timeline, but Mark does say he's been there 2 years.
Yes. Mark's been 2 years. Irving was 3 years and Dylan was 1 year. So I do remember that. So I'm trying to figure out in the timeline, has PD been there the longest? Did PD come at the same time as Irving? Because I'm trying to figure out how it is that PD became department chief over everybody. And it seems like he was the one to orient, for sure, Mark and Dylan. But I'm like, did he orient Irving? And we'll get to it. But there are more theories I have about Irv's time and...
Irv.
Irv.
I love Irv.
By the by, shout out to the casting of John Turturro. I love that he's in this series. It's delightful. It's wonderful. So going back to the scene and what's happening there, I did make note of the questions that are being asked. Because I was just like, first off, this is wild. And do these have a point? Is it just, again, for more disorientation? So the first question is, who are you? The second question is, in which U.S. state or territory were you born? The third question is, please name any U.S. state or territory. The fourth question is, what is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast? And the fifth question is, what is or was the color of your mother's eyes? So, of all those questions, Helly is only able to answer one of them definitively, which is name any U.S. state or territory. And she says Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is just blank slate. And you can see her have this breakdown moment when they ask about the color of her mother's eyes. And she's like breaking her brain to try to remember something that should be so simple.
Right.
And I just was like, oh my God, that would make me crazy to be like, I don't even remember who my parents are. I can't see their face, you know? So obviously the point of Severance and these questions, in part at least, is to make sure that you don't have any connection to your outside life or world.
Right.
And I guess this chip implant that they use to create the Severance procedure somehow finds a way to divorce certain things from your brain but others.
Right.
And I just remembered thinking to myself, like, okay, so, you know, later on Helly starts asking about the day in, day out, and we don't get to see the sun and all this stuff. And I'm like, you can remember what the sun is, but you can't remember what your parents' eyes look like. And you can remember what a state or territory is. But so I'm wondering how they decide what gets remembered.
Well, I think that's the point of the name any U.S. state or territory question, is to confirm that severance has happened, but they haven't severed too much, because they want them to be peripherally aware of the world that exists, or like how much stuff would you have to teach them as a prerequisite to then teach them what you want them to do as their job. They have to remember how to function as a basic human being and know things and how, you know, the social norms that they've learned growing up, and you know, how to behave in an office and all of those things they don't want to sever. So I think they know a world exists, but they don't remember it insofar as they cannot remember anything that puts them in that world. They know it outside of themselves.
I guess my one question, and this is again, like, if you're really trying to make like these super drone type people who just work and come home and work and do the job, why even give them a semblance of understanding that there is day or night, or that there is an outside world? Like, why not just be like, okay, you work until 5 o'clock and you go through that door, and then you'll be right back here and you'll work some more. Like, why even give a concept of days or an external life? Or I don't know. I mean, I guess
technology isn't there yet.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Maybe so. I just, that was one of those things that was a refining question of like, man, if y'all were really trying to like get this to be super effective, I would think you'd want them to know as little as possible about the outside world, or, you know, so that they just kind of crave being there. Maybe that'll come out later. I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe.
Anyway.
For the record, Helly's answers were unknown, unknown, Delaware, unknown, unknown, to which Mark replies, that's a perfect score.
Perfect score. What the hell?
I was like, what the shit? The first time I watched that.
Perfect score. What is happening? Yeah, I get why she wanted to break somebody and break a thing and break a door, because that's unnerving and frustrating. This again goes for me back to more questions of like this orientation process. So this was my thought as I was watching it. I was like, maybe they should do more of a get out situation where you're just like tied to a chair and a TV just comes on once you're cognizant, and then it just explains the world to you, like, hey, you're here, you've been severed. This is the world and this is what happens. And
two things I have written down. One, if the goal of onboarding is to make sure you have a calm transition, you have failed.
You have failed.
Severance Lumon has failed, okay? Two, so later in the episode, as a part of the wrap up of the orientation, is Helly gets to watch a video that her pre-severed self recorded for her to watch, just explaining what severance is and that she elected to do it and it's voluntary.
That should have been the first thing she saw.
It'd be the first thing. You wake up and you see a video of yourself. It's you. So they didn't sever that, right? She recognized herself without having seen herself in a mirror since being severed,
right?
You know, and it was comforting, even though she didn't agree with what herself was saying.
She did not.
It was still comforting.
Oh, let's do a reenactment. This should be moment one after being severed. You're sitting in a chair. There's a TV in front of you. Maybe you're not strapped to the chair. Maybe you are because you might want to run. Who knows? TV comes on as soon as your eyes open. You see a person who looks just like you. Hello. Hi. It's me or you. You're probably wondering, what's going on? How'd I get here? Who am I? Where am I? Let me tell you the answers to all those things. You have elected, I have elected, to do this procedure called severance. Now you're probably wondering, what is severance? Let me explain. Like,
Right.
that should be the first point.
Yeah.
Ah,
Seems straightforward to me.
they need some help with their hiring process. They need to hire some consultants for their
Yeah.
onboarding.
Onboarding is shit right now.
You're
Do
right.
better.
Whew. Let's move on. So that's Helly's opening experience. And at this point, we only see up to, as you said, Mark coming out telling her she got a perfect score. And she's just like, what the what?
Right. Who is this guy?
That's when we jump cut to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And now we don't see Mark at work. We see Mark in his car. Mark is crying buckets of tears.
Sobbing his eyes out.
We have no idea what is going on.
He's like taking breaths in between sobs, crying hard.
Like
Mm-hmm.
heaving sobs. They do not explain why. We don't know if someone punched him in the face. We don't know if he was extremely late to work. We don't know if they didn't get his coffee right at Starbucks. We don't know. We just know this man is sad and then has to pull it together to go into work.
Now it's time for work.
So then you see him go in, and this is like the rigmarole where you get the breakdown of like what you come in for the day. And this is my second visual interesting moment.
Mm-hmm.
They show, gosh, they show so many things, and all of it is just, it is establishing this world. So the first thing you see is Mark leaving his car and he's walking down the walkway towards this massive campus of a building. Think Google, think Apple, like one of those giant campuses where it looks like people live there,
Yeah.
work there, eat there, sleep there, whatever. It's huge. First thing I noticed is the way everything is visually bisected. So you have this one, main path, and then you see all of the cars, the parking is structured where cars are going to the right or to the left. And I was just like, isn't that interesting? And then when they give the overview, it looks like a big giant brain with, the brainstem going down the middle. And I was just like, oh, you guys, so clever.
Yeah. And his path to the building is splitting the brain.
Yep. Over here, over there.
Mhm.
Can't mishmash. Or even just all going one way or all one other. It's just like, it is, again, more clever visual storytelling that's just establishing this is the world we're here, okay? There's over here and there's over there. No in between.
That's it.
Then the next thing is once he gets inside to the lobby area and you see him go up to the receptionist and he has to clear, and they establish this later in the episode, that they are not allowed to come in at the same time. They don't want any fraternization of outside parties. They don't want anyone knowing who anyone is outside of the severance floor. You only know your work personalities when you're at work. So they stagger their times to clock in. So he's got to check in with the receptionist and be like, can I go to work, please, now, please? And she's got to check in with somebody, and I'm sure they got to check in with somebody and then give him the all clear. So then when they pull out and you see him leaving, they have another aerial shot. So many.
They're so good.
Great aerial shots of this lobby floor. You see that layering of the greens and the yellows again. It's got like a pale green on the outside, a yellow on the inside, and then like a richer green in the middle.
And to be very specific, it's like that 70s kitchen poopy green, the middle tone, which again made me question the time period that we're in.
Right. The only thing that throws it is like everyone's wearing clothes that look very modern, but then they're working in these spaces that look kind of retro. So when they pull out and they show that overhead shot, and not only do you see that color scheme recurring, but then I noticed that the overall view of it, it looks like a motherboard or a computer chip.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I want to pull the visual to show. I didn't get a chance to grab it, and I was trying to look for it online. Nobody has this particular image, which is really frustrating. But they've got the chairs aligning, and they just look like little prongs coming out of a microchip. And then the centerpiece looks like like the central processing, whatever. I don't know.
Got it. Yeah.
It looks like a microchip or a motherboard. And that's the first thing I thought, that I was like, oh, they're inside the machine. Here it is. This is where we set it up. And then you see him kind of trailing the outside, and it just looks like, like a little neuron pulsing on its trail.
Yeah.
And everything's in its place. And it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't like there were a ton of people all surrounding this reception desk.
No.
So I was like, that's very intentional. I like it. I like what we're doing here. You're establishing that this is very much like a machine, that everyone has a specific function. There is no interruption, no waywardness. This is the way it's going to be, people. So that was another interesting piece of visual storytelling. And then the next thing we see is him going through the routine of like, he has to, anything that is from his personal life, you got to drop it in the box before you head into the elevator. They even have a watch for him. He can't even bring in his own personal watch.
Right. So he goes to a locker room, right? And he puts everything. And it's interesting. He has an ID badge to
get him in the building.
He puts that ID badge in the locker. He takes a severed floor specific badge out and puts that on.
Which, if you're watching, is very much like this badge right here that I may have received from my screening.
One of her screening goodies.
By the by, if you are watching, the reason I am dressed this way, and I do have that kind of 70s green-ish thing going on, I would like to say I am cosplaying as the janitor on the severed floor. We got the coveralls and the green. I mean, someone's got to clean up, right? And who wants to remember janitorial services? Nobody. Yeah, I'm severed. I don't want to remember none of this stuff. When I go home, I don't want to see poop, pee, papers, none of it. I clean the floor, and I come home, and I get my check. Very nice life.
So we see his process, right? We see his process to get in. And we see him riding the elevator to the severed floor. And you can see a change in his demeanor as he crosses the threshold that kind of switches on the severed device in his brain. And now he's happy-go-lucky Mark S., not the sad sack that was holding back tears 2 seconds ago.
Right.
And kudos to Adam Scott, because it's such a little change, but it's major.
Yep.
If they had started with that scene and we hadn't heard anything about Severance, I would have been like, ooh, what was that? Because it was noticeable.
Yeah. And it's like you're getting some help from the camera. There's like a push and pull out that happens that kind of takes the face and kind of morphs it. But also you see the demeanor shift. You see it go from like slumped shoulders and just like tilted head and just kind of dazed look to like,
yeah,
it's such good physical acting on his part.
Yep.
And then you see him walk down these halls, these pristinely white. This is why there has to be a janitor who is severed on this floor, because the work they probably have to put in to keep those walls white day in and day out. I know it's grunt work that you don't want to remember. A lot of bleach. These halls are as white as Siberia in the winter. Like, it is just ghost town. And then you don't really see signage for other departments or offices or doors.
Yeah, so how the hell do they know where they're going?
I don't know.
It's very confusing. It all looks the same.
It all looks the same. That should have been part of the orientation too, was a map. Like, you are going to need this map the first few days you work here.
Ooh, I just had a thought that I didn't think of before. I think they don't want them to know all what's going on the floor. So maybe they implant that information about like, here's where you need to go. So they just instinctively know where they're supposed to go.
So you just start walking and you don't realize it. That would make sense to me, because one of the questions I had once Helly goes through her first day and ends up there the next day is, I'm like, how she remembered how to get there? Right. I wouldn't have remembered.
That's true.
Well, because the first day they're being escorted by their department head. But if I had to walk there on my own, I'd be like, help, help. I'd be like sending up flares, like, someone come get me. I don't know where I am. Someone come get her. She is lost. Like, so I'm like, maybe there is like a homing beacon or homing device for your department. That would make the most sense.
Not to mention the first day is just very traumatic.
Right.
Like, that trauma makes it harder for you to keep memories.
Mm-hmm. Very true. So yeah, that would make sense. That's part of the chip, is like you get kind of a GPS to your department and nowhere else.
Right. So you're not wandering around making trouble.
That's right.
The first time we see Mark, right, He walks in, they're in the center of their office, and their department, specifically on the severed floor, is microdata refinement. So they have cubicles, 4 desks, and they each have their own very 80s looking retro computer, right?
So old looking.
And he gets in there. Dylan's already there. He's like, "Where's Petey? I don't know. Must be sick." They have this conversation. They're not sure. Then Irv walks in
And has his "Hello, kids. What's for dinner?"
Yeah.
Which they hate.
I told you, stop doing this greeting. So, you see this camaraderie. They've clearly been working together. They have their routine. It's jarring that Petey is not there. And then Mark gets called by Mr. Milchick into Miss Cobell's office. And that's where they say, hey, he's no longer with us, which again is jarring for him because we learn that when people have left previously, there's been a warning.
Yeah. People get notified. They usually do some type of exit video or something like that.
Yeah. So he's like, what? And then he gets his first task is to onboard Helly.
That's right.
And we see his side of the same scene that we saw with Helly earlier. So Mr. Milchick is in there. Irv is sitting next to him, I guess, to help guide him. I'm not really sure what Irv's purpose was, but Mark has a big handbook and he's like, what the heck? And then the storylines join where we left off with Helly first, with Mark coming in saying she got a perfect score on the questions.
Right. So going back to that moment where Mark gets told that he's going to be the department chief of macrodata refinement. Why Mark?
Why Mark?
Why Mark? Mark seems so don't know nothing. I mean, Dylan, not that I necessarily would want Dylan to be my department chief, but Dylan at least is motivated by the work to where it seems like he might focus on that, unless maybe it's more about himself and not about motivating other people. Irving's been there longer.
Well, and that's why I was confused about the seniority thing, because when he's getting told that he's being promoted to that position, Mark also mentions like, oh, I've subbed for PD before.
You're right, he did say that.
So there's got to be a reason why he's also previously been the choice over Irving. What has Irving done to not get the promotion?
Because and the thing is, not only has he been there the longest, but he seems the most pro-Lumon advocate in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was just my question. Like at first you're kind of like, oh, okay, Mark's department chief, cool. You don't know much about him, and you haven't seen much in terms of the mess ups and things like that. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, sure, all right, I guess he's next in line. But as things unfold, I just go back retroactively and I'm like, why Mark? And like you said, if he's been a sub for PD before, why him?
Well, and he questions it too. Mm-hmm. He says, like, I didn't want to be department chief. I don't know why they made me department chief.
I don't get it.
Yeah, we're all confused.
I mean, again, for the purposes of the story, it is what it is. But I want to know what led to that choice and that decision. The only other thing I could think is his proximity to PD, maybe wanting to keep him close to see if PD has said anything or warned him in any way or anything like that they might be able to get out of him.
Right, because this is our first clue that there's something off about PD. Mm-hmm. Well, that he's missing, right?
Right. Inexplicably gone, basically.
Yeah, I think they reveal more later in the episode. But it might be a keep your enemies closer situation promoting Mark.
I can accept that. All right. So, as you said, at this point, we see the training from Mark's side. We see him fumbling. We see Irving there for whatever reason other than to just cast aspersions on Mark's leadership. And then we see him and Helly join. Their stories merge. It's interesting because I don't know if it's just Mark having sympathy for Helly, but it seems like Mark's very taken with wanting Helly to get adjusted. Maybe it's like, my friend is gone and I need to fill the gap and maybe you could be my new friend. So I really want this to work out. I don't know. And it may also be just proving himself in his new role, but he seems especially determined to get Helly to get on board. Not just get on board, but warn her of what happens when you don't get on board. So I don't know that that's something that any other department person would have done with other trainees, or if they just let them find out the hard way. But it seems like he's like, I don't want you to find out the hard way.
Right.
So I found that interesting as far as his character's motivation toward Helly in particular.
Yeah. And so one of my favorite scenes in this is this kind of next part of Helly's orientation after their stories join is Mark, in his effort to seem like very helpful, tells her, ask to leave again. Because in the handbook, you have to ask 3 times before you can let them out of that conference room. So she asks, they begin walking down these sterile hallways, and he leads her to her stairwell. And he's like, you can leave. I can't watch you because of what's going to happen. And it's kind of very cryptic. She's like, what are you talking about? Okay, whatever. She leaves and she's immediately thrown back into the same hallway.
Right back.
And she does this 3 or 4 times.
Increasingly more violently so.
Yeah, more violently. Now she's like running. She's a linebacker, right? Until she gives up and she comes to that realization, okay, this severance that he tried to explain to me earlier is real. They're telling me that I left this hallway, and I know my perception of reality right now, I have never left this hallway. I open the door and I'm right back in. Well, it's because when she leaves the severed floor, she cannot access the memories of Severance and vice versa. So to her, it feels like she's coming back in. We on our end don't know how much time she's actually spent out in the stairwell as her outside version. And I was just like, oh, this is wild.
Right. Can I say that the very first time I saw this, and even this time rewatching it, that scene is so trippy to see someone walk out a door and walk back in.
Yes.
And like, it's just the weirdest thing for your brain to like, wait, she went out, but she's in. And I can't imagine experiencing that in your physical body. Like, I pushed a door.
Yes.
It went this way.
Yes.
Somehow I'm coming in this way. That would anger me so much.
Right. All I could think was like, this is the most gaslighty way to fucking explain Severance to someone. You know what I mean? To be like, you're not actually experiencing what you think you're experiencing. That's the definition of gaslighting. Like, it's terrible.
Let me tell you something. In general, Lumon is like gaslight central.
It is.
Like, everything they do from the top down is gaslighting the person underneath you. I noted that through other interactions and exchanges when Mark went in to get his department chief title, and he sits down and Cobell's like, the board is joining us. They won't be speaking. Okay. And then the declining to speak first, like that's a recurring thing that happens in the meetings where like the person above you is like, the board would like you to speak, or Miss So-and-so would like you to speak. It's like, what? Like, it's so gaslighty.
It is very gaslighty.
And all the exchanges that happen between subordinates and their superiors is exactly that way, to make you feel crazy, like for even thinking or asking or saying, which again, tapping into some of that corporate culture is very on brand. Like, how many times have you gone in to talk to a manager, to talk to HR, to talk to whoever, and tell them a situation, and they're just like, actually, what I think is going on, and perhaps this is just how you experience it, and it's like, what? No, I know what I saw.
No, the mission here isn't to change my mind about what I experienced. It's for you to do something to that.
Bingo. So yeah, so that, I feel like when they talk about the 9 core values, it should be 10, and gaslight should be number 1. Like, that should be
gaslight.
How it goes.
Right?
When in doubt, gaslight. Anyway, yeah. So
hold on. Sorry, I wanted to say this because I just liked the way they said it. So it's her first insight to the fact that her memories are spatially dictated.
Yeah.
So you remember severed events on the severed floor only, period.
Point blank.
There's no other way to access them. You're not going to access anything else either.
I did like the way they said that, and I think that came out in her DVD, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we'll get into it as the show goes on, because there is the question of who would elect to participate in this and why.
Yes.
And I remember even as the promotion for this series was going, where they basically did say, like, what if you could, divorce your work from your personal? And on the outset, it does sound kind of appealing, like, man, It would be nice to like leave work things at work
Yeah.
and, preserve home things or keep home stuff from bleeding into your work life. And on some level, that sounds appealing. Like, man, I would love at the end of the day to just be like, I'm done with work. It stays at work and it does not return to me until work the next day. But then when you really start thinking about it, it's like, wait, you have to be pretty effed up to choose to have your brain split in two. And they get into that a lot as the season goes on. More people start kind of questioning or raising questions about what Severance really is and what it really does. But it does make you wonder for each of these characters here. It's like you've all chosen to be severed. What led you to that choice? And the only person so far we've gotten any insight to is Mark.
Yes.
Let's get into this dinner party. I want to talk about it. We got to talk about it.
Yes. So the dinner party happens. This is at the end of the first day. So we see Mark leave and go do more of his home process.
And before he gets home, he's in his car. He takes off, almost hits Helly,
Right.
who's walking in the parking lot, and she's got flowers and she's just walking to her car and he doesn't see her. So this is the one time, now they don't know who each other are, but this is the one time that they actually have an interaction outside of work. And then, of course, my first question when I saw that was like, where'd she get the flowers from? Whether that is, relevant or not, I just kind of like wanted to know, like, who's giving flowers? So yes, he goes home. Continue.
Yeah, and we see that he has forgotten that his sister has invited him, or he's been obligated to go to this dinner party that his brother-in-law is throwing, that is a dinner party where they won't be eating dinner so that they can experience each other more fully. So, just dripping with pretension before you even get there.
My God, they are the epitome of pretentious friends in pretentious stan of pretentious land. Like, I let me first say, number one, they don't say Mark's sister's name for the longest time. And so I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, who is this woman? And and it's not until in the dinner party where they talk about their parents that I was like, oh, it's their sister. Okay. Didn't know who she was.
Their siblings. Yeah. Right. Got it.
Could have been a friend, could have been an ex, could have been another neighbor. I don't know. But they do not make that clear at all. And I don't even know when they say her name, Devin, because that's the one name I could not remember when I would ever try to recall characters. I was like,
that's true.
What is her name? I don't know. And honestly, till I went to IMDb to look it up for this, I was like, oh, Devin. Okay, yeah. Never hear her name. And if I'm wrong, if they said it and I just missed it, you guys can let me know. But I don't recall saying it. So I don't know much about Devin. They give us a little bit later in the season, but for now, there's not much that's shared outside of it being Mark's sister, and she's pregnant, and she is with Rickon. Why and how?
Yeah.
She doesn't even seem like the type that would ever be interested in this man.
I think we learned very quickly that Mark and Devin have a very close relationship. They have a very jokey, sarcastic relationship. They seem to have the same sense of humor. And so anytime that Mark is annoyed with Rickon, it's like his wife has got to be annoyed with him right now. So yeah, I too am like, how in the world did these two end up together? I hope we get more of that at some point, but I don't quite.
I need answers. It'd be one thing if when you get to Rickon's friend circle or like their friend circle and you see kind of a mix of personalities, but they are all just like Rickon.
Yep.
Talking out their buttholes and don't know what the crap they're talking about.
Stuffy, very turtlenecks, and speaking with authority on subjects they have no reason to speak with authority on, and politely interrupting each other to correct each other.
And then agree with each other about the corrections. And like, it's just so ego stroking. Let me just sniff your butt. You can sniff his butt. It's just, it is the epitome of a friend group that is not real friends, because everyone's just saying what everyone else wants to hear.
Yeah.
And then it's an echo chamber of, oh, yes, it's so brilliant. Oh, it's beautiful. My favorite part in that dinner party is when that guy, the black guy Patton, starts talking about how he watched this documentary about, World War One, and Mark, maybe you can answer this for me, but they declined to call it World War I and instead called it the Great War. Ah, it must have been a faux pas. I mean, how ridiculous. And everyone starts laughing. And then he's just like, well, that's because there was no World War II, dummy.
Right.
Like,
wouldn't have called it World War I because it was the first one. He's like, doesn't everybody know that?
Bingo. And then the moment that everybody kind of processes it, and they're just like, oh, well, that's why we have a history guy here, right? Am I right?
Right, yeah, because what they're used to is being like, oh, how interesting.
How insightful.
It never occurred to me. Oh, faux pas. I wonder why. Like,
oh my God.
No one in that group is going to say to the other one outright, that was fucking stupid. They're not going to do it. It was
so dumb. And I was so glad that he called him on it. And that guy looked so butthurt to have him chin checked like that.
Yeah.
Like, clearly he is not corrected often. Clearly he's not the guy that people are like, oh, you're wrong. Like, he likes being right. Yeah. He likes being seen as being right. And so to take that on the chin in front of everybody, I know hurt his feelings.
Well, I mean, he gets his jab back in the next conversation,
he does.
Right? So this has to be the first time this friend group is meeting Mark, because there's a lot of questions about Mark. So Mark, you used to be a history teacher. Tell me about this, blah, 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 blah. And then Rickon shares that Mark is a Lumon man. And Mark is trying to answer their questions discreetly and saying like, oh, I work in archives. Blah, 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 blah. And Rickon reveals that he is severed. And Devin very quickly, thankfully, says, I think that's Mark's
choice to
share. And I was like, what an asshole, sidebar, what an asshole. Yeah. Because if Mark has been there for 2 years, there's no way this is the first time this has come up.
Yeah.
Like, what a dick move.
In that moment, I felt like he personally felt attacked by Mark for Mark correcting his friend and took it as a slight on himself. And then that was his little moment of like, oh, okay, well, let me share a fun fact about you, Mark. Guess what, guys? He's severed. And it's like, your friend group, what they think about Severance, how they feel about it. I'm sure y'all have talked about it. And so you personally outed this man to embarrass him and put him on the defensive for having the gall to have something to say about your friends. And I was like, I don't appreciate this. I am not a fan of Rickon's. And even though our podcast is named after his book, we'll get to that. But it's just like, I cannot believe that's so petty.
Right. And so, it leads to a line of questioning about Severance. What makes what makes one choose it? What is it like? What does it feel like? I just don't understand the visceral aspect of it, is what one of the partygoers says. And so Patton kind of gets his jabs back in there because Mark is like clearly flustered. He's not sure how to answer the questions, and Patton keeps interrupting to explain the process to everyone else. So he's like, well, you knew about the Great War, but I know more about Severance, and you're severed.
Just the two of them. I was like, I want to punch somebody. I'd want to reach across the table and just like double slap. But going into that conversation, first off, let's just establish Rickon's messy. He's messy. He's a mess. And his friends are messy. But going into the conversation, because there's a lot of back and forth that happens, and I kind of took note of some of the things that came out, both personally for Mark and just with Lumon. So first off, this is the first time that we hear that Mark's wife is the one who passed away. We now put together that this is probably what he was crying about in the car.
Right.
So this is where we hear that his wife, and her name is Gemma, has died. This is where we find out how long Mark has been at Lumon, 2 years.
Yes.
We also find out that Lumon is a pharmaceutical company and or a tech company, ? And that Lumon has been around since the 1800s. So it's a company that's long in the tooth. Don't know when it kind of rose to be the corporate giant it is.
They started in topical salves, apparently.
Isn't that right, Mark? Did I get that right? Is that right? But yeah, so those are some of the things that came out that I was like, okay, good to note all these things, just for context and history and what is publicly out there, I guess, about the company. Because it seems like even though there are things that people know, there's a lot of mystery publicly around Lumon and what they are and what they do and how they function. So the main thing people seem to understand about it is that it's a big old company. It's been around for a while. They were the pioneers of Severance. And that's pretty much it. So Everything else, people are just kind of like, don't really know what they do or who does what, or it's all kind of weird and a mystery. But that does come out in the conversation. So Mark, then overwhelmed by everything, does talk to his sister. They have a sidebar. That's when you realize that she is not the same as these folks over here, that, like you said earlier, they clearly do have a wry humor with each other and know how to joke with each other. And you get to kind of see that other side. It's interesting seeing her with Rickon. She's a little more quiet and just kind of is like, okay, babe, sure, babe, whatever, babe. And I'm like, this is weird. Are you severed? Like, it doesn't seem to ring true to her as a person when you see her with Mark. But Mark ends up staying at his sister's house for the night.
Correct.
He has had much too much to drink.
There was no dinner.
And nothing to eat because no dinner.
Stupid.
But while he is there, he ends up waking up in the middle of the night. So he gets up to go get some water in the middle of the night. He's at the kitchen window, and then we see a person just standing out in the trees in the snow.
In Mark's words, a businessman.
A businessman.
Because he's in a suit. He's the shepherd, but he's in a suit. Like, I
love that. That's how it's like, no. A businessman standing in the woods, staring in my window.
Very creepy.
He describes him to his sister the next day. Mm-hmm. So that's how we get that descriptor. So he's trying to tell her, she's just kind of like, well, there's a lot of weirdos around here.
Yeah, whatever. There's a bar up the street. It must have been, a drunk person wandering. That's, how she
drunk businessman.
Drunk businessman.
As you do. So Mark just kind of shrugs it off, goes on about his day. And then I believe at this point is when we see him just kind of sitting in the diner. So, we totally forgot that. Doesn't that happen in this episode where she throws the speaker box at his head?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, we did miss it. I was trying to figure out when to fit it back in. But when Helly is mad at Mark in the orientation, she throws the speaker box at his head.
Straight up chucked it at his forehead.
Yeah. Oh, man, it's the funniest scene.
It is.
And, they patch him up. They give him a Band-Aid. And, of course, since his outside self, which we haven't explained, they call the outside selves outies. So his outie has no memory of it. So they have to give an explanation. So they leave a note on his car that explains that he hit his head on the overhead projector while moving some things in the storage room. We're so sorry. Here's a gift card to a restaurant called Pips. So then fast forward to what Rodnesha, the scene was
him at Pip's Diner.
At Pip's Diner.
Yes, that was the backtrack. It explains why he's at Pip's. He's making use of that gift card money that he got for, workplace injuries. And so I also love that that's how they have to explain, because obviously there's going to be things that happen. And clearly they're lying because they don't tell him the real reason, which is you were training someone today who didn't know up from down. She got mad and threw a speaker at your head.
Right, you got assaulted at work today. That's what really happened.
Not to mention, sidebar on a sidebar, we also realize that his outie thinks that he's doing a totally different job than what he's actually doing. He says that he's in the corporate archives and he thinks that he's cataloging things, which I guess to some degree is true, but they don't actually tell him the name of his department is macro data refinement.
No.
They don't tell him you're sorting numbers or doing weird stuff like that. He thinks he's like a corporate historian.
Yeah.
So we're already seeing the lies that are happening as a result of Severance. It's like, we could tell you anything and you'll never know the truth because you elected to be severed.
Wild.
Exactly. And let me tell you something. I was a little annoyed to see that Pips was a diner and not like a steakhouse. I got injured on the job and you gave me a gift card to a diner.
The way the gift card looked, Pips seemed like it was going to be like a Dave and Buster's type of place to me.
That makes sense too.
I don't know why.
I thought it was going to be like, Pip's Steakhouse and Seafood or something where it's like, oh, go have a nice dinner on us, please come back to work for us. But a diner, I would have been like, oh.
Right, and like an old broke down looking diner.
Right, not even a nice diner. I would have been like, wait a minute, so this is how you reward me for workplace injuries?
Well, I mean, and that's why when Devin picks him up and asks what happened, she's like, Pips? Yeah, enjoy. Like, wow.
Which clearly must be the one place in town to eat, I guess. So the fact that she already knew. Or something has happened to him before and they gave him a Pips gift card that time too. Right. That's probably the solution to everything. So he's sitting at Pips. He's on the phone with his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, who we still have not seen, talking about the trash still. Man, this trash can debacle must really be a linchpin for these two's relationship.
Look, apparently the recycling and the trash go out on different days. It doesn't make sense to Miss Selvig. Mark is sympathetic to that. You're right, it doesn't make sense. She keeps putting the wrong bin out on the wrong day and blocking his stuff. And, apparently it's very serious and the trash person can't move it. So it's an ordeal for Mark
to have to explain.
And it's very clear that it's been explained multiple times.
God, I don't even want to know how many times. But that does bring up a point of like, how long has Mrs. Selvig been Mark's neighbor?
Right.
Because this seems like a conversation you would have with someone who's new to the neighborhood or is forgetful old lady, or they had a change of like the recycle days and trash days and now they're separate. Like this seems like something that would happen when it's a new thing. If she's been your neighbor for a while, she should know about these dang trash cans.
That didn't occur to me. So is this a new neighbor because something caused them to need to watch Mark?
I still haven't been able to land the plane of why he's at Pips. He's at Pips.
Well, that's just where he goes to eat. He's got a gift card. He goes to eat after, I believe it's after the second day, right? Like we see him go back to work after the party and then he comes back, right? And he's just having his lonely dinner at Pips.
And so then someone just sits down in his booth and starts talking and says, "Hi kids, what's for dinner?" And this is where we see Petey.
Yep. It is the businessman from the woods before.
This is the businessman. I don't know why that's so funny to me. Now, here's the thing. This is Outie Mark. Now we can start using that term. This is Outie Mark. He don't know Petey from Pete the cat.
Right.
So he doesn't know who this man is. He just knows he just sat down in his booth. He recognizes his suit and he's like, "You're the guy who was outside my window."
Yeah.
And he's like, who are you? And he says he's Petey. And he's like, okay. And he tells him like, "We work together. I worked at Lumon. And in fact, we were friends." And Mark is just like, well, at first he kind of, it's just like, "Okay, you work at Lumon, but you can't know me because everyone I work with is severed." And he's like, "Yeah, I know. I was severed. I'm not no more." And Mark's like, no, not possible. It is irreversible, as they say. It cannot be undone. And Petey's like, "Right. Well, found some folks. They helped me bypass it. And it has been undone effectively." And he calls it reintegration.
Yes.
So Mark keeps saying like unsever, unsever, unsever. And Petey calls it reintegration. And I think the reason is that like it really can't be undone. So in that sense, it is true, but it's like taking a string or twine and unpulling the strings to sever, but then trying to retwist them back. Right? So you can't effectively have undone the fact that you separated the strings, but you can try to merge them back together, but they're not going to fit quite the same way they did.
Yeah, not in the same way. Right.
Hey, that was a nice little analogy I made.
It was. I was like, I'm visualizing, I'm following your visual. It's not.
Yeah, so then they get into more conversation. Obviously, Mark has questions. He asks him if he's being pursued, and Petey's like, "Yep." And I think he did it, said it as a joke, but he's like, "No, yeah, probably Grainer." Who have we met Grainer yet?
No, he's just been mentioned. So okay. Mr. Grainer is kind of the enforcer on the severed floor for anytime someone that works there does something they're not supposed to do. And our introduction to him is Helly trying to sneak out a note. That's this episode too. That's on the second day.
Okay, I thought that. It is.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So
we've seen him one time. He shows up.
We've seen him. So Mark takes the fall for Helly, like, "Oh, this is my new trainee. I must have forgotten to tell her that she can't take a note out." And then Mr. Grainer's like, "Somebody's got to pay the price for this," and takes Mark somewhere. We don't know what this punishment is yet. We learn about it later.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yes. So Grainer is the man that Petey presumes is pursuing him. And like you said, we don't really know much more other than he's somewhat of an enforcer and doesn't seem like a great guy to want to run into in your off hours. So more will come out about Mr. Grainer. So at the end of this conversation and this exchange, which I love this little line when Petey gets up and he walks away, Mark is just kind of like, so we're friends, is basically what you're telling me. And Petey says, I'm your best friend. You're my very good friend. That's like, aw, but then it's also like, wait, what does it mean? You know, because it's like, clearly I'm the best person in your life, but you're not necessarily the best person in mine. But you're my very good friend, but not my best friend.
Yeah, I love it because it brings up so many questions for me. So it brings
Mm-hmm.
up like, well, you aren't supposed to have memories of outside friends, but maybe you say that because you're reintegrating and maybe you're remembering who your actual best friends
Mm-hmm.
are in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Or has Petey been on the severed floor for so long that he's seen many, many people
Mm.
work there, and maybe there was someone that he was even closer
Closer
to at
to.
work than Mark.
It does raise that question because it's like you made a very intentional point of specifying that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only way he could, and like you said, maybe it could be based on his severed memories. It could be. There could have been someone else that maybe was a closer friend, which would be very interesting to see come up if it does. But then it also could just be the remerging and realizing, like, actually, I have people closer to me in my outside life. And while you are a very good friend of mine,
Mm-hmm.
you're not my best friend. And maybe on another level, I can't call you my best friend because you don't really know me.
Right. Because how could you? Because I don't know me.
Mm, think on that, audience. Um, getting deep. So after all that, he leaves a card with Mark. Mark goes to his car. He actually opens it. It says, Happy birthday, niece. Um, and then you get this voiceover from Petey where he essentially kind of explains why he had to give him this card. So you find out, obviously, he's worried that someone may be listening to them or watching them. And he wants to give Mark this option, but he doesn't want to get caught. And he basically, at the end of the card, says, if you really want to know the truth about what's going on, I'm at this location. You can come find me if you want to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force this on you. So if you don't want to know, if you want to stay in blissful ignorance, you can. But I just want to lay it out there to you. And I feel like because Petey and him were so close at work, there must be a part of Petey that knows at least any Mark would want to know. So maybe he's hoping on some level that will come to the surface of Outie Mark.
Right. Because severance is not supposed to change their personality, right? It's just supposed to fragment when and where they can access specific
Mm-hmm.
memories. So again, you gotta think like, well, I think this man would believe me at work. So some part of him's gotta have some trusting intuition for me outside.
Right, because we get the key to that when they're sitting at the table, and I think Mark says to him, "Okay, what? So you got upset and you gotten severed rather than going through the appropriate channels and requesting a resignation?" And he says, "No, I did that, and you did too."
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, their work selves have been trying to get out and have discussed if there's a way.
Right.
So, yeah, that must be one of those things where he's like, "I just gotta hope that somewhere inside that Mark." Is gonna clue in on this and want to know more.
Right.
And then we get to the end where Mark gets home and
We reveal that Mrs. Selvig is Miss Cobell.
man, oh man.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Mark,
Sorry again about
I just keep thinking
bins.
about those damn bins. Oh, Mark,
Yeah.
oh gosh, I just want to
Yeah.
apologize. I can't even. I love her Mrs. Selvig voice so much.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love Patricia
Oh
Arquette
man.
so much in so many things. And this by far is got to be my favorite.
I agree. I concur. What a joy, what a delight, what a treat.
And what fun for her to get to play. Now, this is the same character, but it's two different
Hmm.
characters. Because man, oh man, Miss Cobell is a scary bitch, and Mrs. Selvig is just like your caring old grandmother. Like she's the neighborhood elderly
Hmm.
lady that you just treats you like she would any of her grandchildren.
Right.
So such two different drastically different characters.
And what fun that must be as an actor to get to play. Now, I want to say, I guess in general, for everyone cast in this show, what an opportunity to get to play diametrically opposing sides of a single coin.
Right.
Because we'll see as we go down the line, everyone's going to get that moment.
Right.
Because clearly they're severed. So everyone has an inner life and an outer life, a work life and a home life. And we're going to get to see, at least for most of our Lumon people, them get to play these different sides of oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And as an actor, that's quite the option to get to like not have a, no character is one note, no person is one note, but to get to outwardly portray these different aspects to one person rather than having an internal life and an external life. The internal becomes external and vice versa as these characters go in and out. Mm-hmm. And then how that is reflexive of we as people and our home life and our work life. We are different people at work than we are at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. And the way it is structured, much like the way Lumon is structured, is that it must be that way. You cannot be how you are at home at work. Mm-hmm. There is a consequence to bringing certain behaviors to work. And they could be somewhat benign. I mean, we're not talking about like drinking and carousing and being crazy, but like even just attitudes, what you wear, your dress code, hair, all these different things. And so we have these corporate structures that are set up to punish you either, openly or somewhat more subtly for bringing those outside things in. It literally is like once you walk through that door, it is almost like having that zoop, zoop moment where it's like, I have to now be the person they expect me to be. Mm-hmm. And then I can go cry in my car like Mark later when I'm done. And that's just such a lot to ask for people to do. It's such an unnatural way of processing things.
Right.
Just, something to think about. Anyway. And that's episode 1.
Thanks for listening.
To wrap things up, obviously we will have this podcast available wherever you listen to your podcast. It could be Spotify, it could be Apple, it could be some other unknown entity, who knows. But we will likely be available for you to listen to on one or the other. This is episode 1, guys, so we're still working out some kinks. But if there's a rating system, rate us well, okay? Leave us some nice little reviews and help boost our metrics, if you will. Don't let the corporation keep us down. We're trying to like build ourselves up, and do something. We're not trying to do something new and different. We're trying to podcast like everybody else. We just want to be good. So
a little bit off the rails, but we hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, we will be back with episode 2. So if you have not watched the episode, go watch it now. Go rewatch episode 1 in light of some of the things we discussed. And if there's anything you want to let us know about, you can hit us up on our socials. We need a sign off. We'll have to think of that for the next time, guys. We'll figure out a sign off.
Oh, there's gotta be a line from the show.
We're gonna find one. We'll find it. All right. We will see you guys next time. Have a great day.
This has been the You Are, a Severance podcast.
Thank you and good night. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the You Are with me, Rodnesha Green, and my co-host, Callie Thomas. If you got a question for us, want to talk theories, share memes, or maybe you just want to connect, you can follow us at the UUR Pod over on Blue Sky or Threads. Or you can email us at theuurpod@gmail.com.